Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much again for joining me here. Hope you're having a great day. We're going to take a quick look at the crypto market overview, touching on some important stuff here, the rising wedge pattern from Bitcoin, potential play out to the downside further. Same thing with a weekly divergence, just kind of quickly compare some coins that we're looking at here today, and obviously understand a little bit about CME futures and dominance. So be sure to stick around. We've got an important one here today. Let's take a look. All right, before we get started here on the charts, folks, I'd like to start off with a little bit of light content here. Basically just a vote that I sent out earlier today, roughly 2 hours ago on social media. We can see majority of you feel that we're going to see a bounce off 112,000. That's that previous high local low that hasn't been retested yet. So my thoughts are leaning more towards that. I still feel like we're going to see one more leg down. I'll explain more so as to why I feel that way. But on YouTube, coincidentally, you folks are feeling quite bullish. So people are voting more so for the bottom being in right now at this point on YouTube. So interesting to see that difference, that polarity, so to speak. Before we jump into the actual chart for Bitcoin, I just want to highlight we do have a divergence here on the 3-day time frame with that rising wedge pattern potentially breaking its ascending trend. We haven't broken it yet, but it is starting to form. We're gaining momentum here essentially to the downside with this, this histogram essentially letting us know that further downside should be expected based on us gaining momentum. We also have a divergence on the weekly time frame, basically just a bearish divergence letting us know the overall trend should continue to progress lower, unless of course we break that 120K range, we're more likely to go lower. When we take a quick look at these coins here at a glance, as just a quick perspective, for Bitcoin on the far left, we can see Chainlink and AVAX, these two here, are looking quite strong versus the overall sentiment in this pullback. In other words, even though they both pulled back, they haven't established lower lows. And while Litecoin, ICP, and ONDO have, doesn't mean they're in dire straits by any stretch, we can expect those to be bearish backtested here soon. We'll talk more about that in a minute. When we look here at dominance, we can recognize that once more, as per usual, money's flowing into stable coins, and money is flowing into Bitcoin. So basically money goes away from altcoins into stablecoin, goes right into Bitcoin. Once Bitcoin pumps at a certain point, Bitcoin dominance blows off the top and we start to see money flow into altcoins. So right now is basically telling us we're not in a great situation to consider buying an altcoin effectively in the overall sentiment. Not saying that you shouldn't buy the dip. I've actually recommended some of that earlier today in my video, my previous video earlier, but the concept here is just depends on what kind of trader you are, really depending on the overall sentiment. But expecting one more leg down from Bitcoin, if you have a tight, have tight margins, you're going to take some quick longs. That's all well and good. Anyways, Ethereum open CME gap here between 4,100 and roughly 4,200. So there's just a rough estimate there. All other CME gaps have been filled with Solana and Bitcoin. Cool. So that's kind of the baseline there. We look at altcoin season index still looking quite strong. Altcoins are not super terrible shape, by the way. Our market cap is still at 1.62 trillion. Anything over 1.5, it generally is a favorable sign, where we have majority of altcoins actually outperforming Bitcoin still, even with this retracement. So what's going on with Bitcoin? We're going to talk about the falling wedge in a moment. Let's quickly recognize kind of the back end data first. We have a candle wick all the way down to our previous descending trend. So it's a really common occurrence, that 115,300 range. That was a previous high working as a new low. Okay, so we can see that 115K as a potential support. We also have top traders taking longs versus shorts right now at this point. So longs are in play. Same thing with bid and ask ratio. Bids are higher than asks, so people are buying the dips. That's essentially what it's telling us. So even if the price were to go down one more time, we'll see that next dip essentially recovered quickly. It's just kind of how the market's responding right now. And we look here though, let's go ahead and refresh these guys and just double check. Make sure when we look at open interest for Bitcoin, we can recognize 116,000 is that level. I mentioned this in my Discord community too. It's important to recognize that if we close above 116,000, then we have a chance at recovering here. If we close below that, it may be a bad sign, showing that the bears have taken control of this time frame and that we're going to be in dire straits. Quick congrats to our community here for some nice profits. By the way, we've been shorting Ethereum 40% on our short from 2 days ago, Solana 3 days ago, 35%, and Sui 32% from 3 days ago. CryptoCash.tech is a site, link down below if you're curious about that. The last thing we want to look at here, first of all, though, or just kind of summarizing, is that liquidation is still at 20 billion. So while this number is subsiding, that's not necessarily a great sign, implying that bears are still in control. However, the last 7 days, we can see we're rallying back to this halfway point in between that 120K resistance and 114K support. Both areas have significant amount of liquidation. Okay, keep in mind, Support levels aren't based on liquidation. Liquidations usually piles up at support levels because people feel comfortable having a stop loss or liquidation event occur at that range because it would be an invalidated trade at that point. That's kind of how I like to trade too in most cases. It's all subjective, of course. Quickly to note, daily time frame for Bitcoin is looking still decent. We have some confluence here in the 116K range with these moving averages. The daily time frame hasn't broken bearish yet, even though we do have a divergence on the daily and we are testing this 50 on the RSI. We're still not quite in the doghouse yet. But I personally feel with this momentum, we got one more leg down. Those are just my thoughts. I hope I'm wrong, the price goes up, but that's the general consensus here. But once more, this falling wedge, we are essentially creating lower highs and lower lows, starting to compress into a range. The likelihood of breakout is higher because of that. And with the fact that we have so many people shorting now, it would seem sensible for the price to recover and bounce from here. But once more, this may be short-lived, likely a dead cat bounce to reject off this 118K rough estimate resistance range, which is this high volume point of control above the price. So once more, we can see a lot of confluence there at that 118K. So my expectation is a rejection off 118K. We reclaim that level or go higher. We'll probably continue up from there. But for right now, we're still establishing lower highs and lower lows. We've got to respect that. All right, taking a look at respect. Link has no respect for the market and is essentially doing awesome, even still at this point. We have a descending trend, keep that in mind. But if we take a look at the backend data here, let's go ahead and start with this and kind of recognize there's a tremendous amount of open interest at $21.80, roughly just say $22, between 22 and 23. That lets us know that we're in pretty good shape here to see support if the price continues to pull back. We're going to probably see a nice pivot and bounce off that level. Furthermore, liquidation delta is approaching break-even, which is usually a good sign for continuation higher. So if Bitcoin can maintain its range and go just a little bit further up, I think Link will probably break out and hit this 2650 liquidation range just above the price. Taking a look at the chart though, the 4-hour time frame does tell us we have a fair value gap. So if we pull back a little bit lower, this low $23 range makes a lot of sense for a pivot and a bounce off that level. I'd be very interested in considering along at that range because that would be within the previous channel, but also the fair value gap would get filled and we have a lot of confluence there based on moving averages. Keep in mind, and please note, I'm not saying that because it's a 0.618 fib level. That is while it's very awesome and excellent that we have a nice key fib level there, you don't trade solely based on one thing, right? There's extra confirming factors in that range there. So to me, low $23 is a very optimal place to consider a long, especially if Bitcoin has one more leg down. So that's kind of what we're looking at there for Chainlink. Overall, very good scenario. Litecoin has a unique kind of trade setup here. This is a descending type of pattern similar to Bitcoin. In a lot of ways, it's very, very synonymous with Bitcoin. But we look at the backend data, we can see 114K, sorry, 114 even. Interesting how that percentage works very similar with Bitcoin too. We can see 113 is that lower support range based on open interest. And once more, 126 is that resistance. If we look at liquidation delta, we can recognize we're still very bearish here on this coin, all the more reason why we may actually see a short squeeze soon. And if we do recognize liquidation, majority of local liquidation has been swept, but there are some late longs as low as 114. So if we come down to 114, that seems like an optimal consideration for a long, not only based on open interest, but there's that extra area of liquidation that could get swept here next. Let's take a look though at the overall sentiment here. 4-hour time frame does show that we have a lot of resistance at 119 to 120. Basically, that was a previous low that worked as a support until it didn't. Okay, so we can presume the price will reject off that level and come down lower based on the simple sense that that was a solid support in the past. Once more, it's not a guarantee, of course. A lot of it depends on Bitcoin, but for the most part at this point, this feels also like a dead cat bounce. We may see a push up to this point of control here at about 120 and reject. So to me, 119 to 120 seems like a very sensible short consideration, especially if Bitcoin pulls back once more. But shorting Litecoin honestly is inherently more risky than shorting any other coin just because it's such a strong coin. I don't necessarily recommend it. So 4-hour time frame on AVAX, let's look at that here in just a minute. Quick baseline here is that there's a ridiculous amount of open interest between 24 and 25.50 for AVAX. So even though this coin's looking strong on the charts, that is not a good sign, not a good consideration here for taking a long position into such resistance. I don't recommend it. So liquidation short delta is still high. We look here as well, we can recognize that there's a tremendous amount of liquidation down below, as low as 22, possibly even 21. So further downside seems to be a lot more sensible here for AVAX. Let's double check though and kind of see where we're at on the charts. We look at the daily time frame. we can recognize that we're still above some moving averages. So even though we could pull back, it may not be like a monumental retracement, but we're right here consolidating at our point of control at 2630. Moving averages are starting to compress. We look at the RSI. We're testing 50 in the RSI with stochastic swinging down, losing our moving average there. These are a lot of bearish qualities. 4-hour time frame should also reflect similar behavior. We're under 50 in the RSI. While money flow index is high, we got to recognize that there's a significant divergence on the Bitcoin chart. And if you look at how poorly AVAX is responding to this Bitcoin sell-off, it's indication that further downside would make sense. We're also retesting this lower support range here of 2350 multiple times. I'm feeling like we're going to still pull back here soon. So I would say that a short on AVAX to the lower liquidation range and or this open interest range of 22 seems to make a lot of sense. So low to mid $22 would be either a good consideration for a long or you short to that level. Let's take a look here at ICP. Let's quickly understand this guy here. ICP is, well, it's in decent shape. Let's talk about this. 520 is that area of open interest. We have liquidation short delta, of course, that's no surprise. And if we see here, there's liquidation above and below the price. So one more leg down makes a tremendous amount of sense with how much liquidation is below the price. Market makers really love sweeping those levels. But if we look here in the overall sense and we see the 4-hour time frame, this is still a bearish type of divergence. We're underneath all moving averages, even though we have some confluence here and we could bounce. The state of the market doesn't lead me to believe that we're going to be going up anytime soon. So I think ICP is actually on its way down for one more leg down to that low $5, possibly upper $4 range, just based on the significant divergences on multiple time frames. If we look at the daily though, we are diverging on the MACD as well, which is never a good sign, and we lost 50 on the RSI. Yeah, ICP is going to probably pull back a little bit further, especially with all these moving averages above the price right there at 542. So I got my money is on further pullback for ICP. Take a look here on ONDO. Let's go ahead and round out the summary here today with ONDO. This is one of my highly requested coins. My community trades the heck out of this coin too. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Now, I think I have this on our social media, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just go ahead and pull this up. This is, nope, let's refresh this here. And we're looking at, there we go, ONDO. So back in liquidation data kind of tells us that we got this 90 to 95 cent range here as liquidation, significant amount of 80 cents. When we look at liquidation delta, of course it's bearish, there's no surprise there. There's more open interest above the price. Generally, those are all unfavorable signs. Now this coin does have a tendency of recovering well, and we had a previous high. It's working as a new low here. There's a solid chance we get a bounce and a pivot from here. So this coin does look stronger in that sense. There's more confirming factors at this 95 cent range. So, not proposing you take a long, but I'm just saying that may be a good DCA consideration for you. Daily time frame, also a lot of confluence. Both moving averages are hanging out at 95 cents. That's a very good sign. We are losing the daily time frame and MACD is diverging though. So based on support, this coin has a lot of support at 95 cents. We lose 95 cents, you may want to cut your losses on a long. That's the easy way to understand it. So if you're going to consider a long on this coin, those are some thoughts there for, either taking a long at 95 or you lose 95. Probably better off to wait to see what happens next, just because there's probably a pretty significant continuation lower if you lose that level. But volume is decent. Honestly, overall, ONDO is probably one of the few coins here that we covered today that looks like it may want to recover a lot quicker. All right, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Like, subscribe, follow if you haven't already. Join us over at BitUnix too, folks. Links down below for this, of course. But excellent exchange. We use them consistently. No KYC or VPN required. And join us over on Twitter, Telegram, or Discord if you want to become a better trader. We got an awesome community. Look forward to getting to know you better. Have a good one. We'll see you soon.